Welcome to Ukraine Inside. This is Sergeant Sarah Ashton Cirillo of the Armed Forces of Ukraine's Territorial Defense Forces Media Unit, and I am with the co-host of Ukraine Inside, Олександр Мусієнко. Олександр, as we were discussing last week, you are quite varied in your understanding of what's taking place in Ukraine. To touch on your CV, you are a military analyst, you are a lawyer by trade, and you happen to be, possibly your most important role, the founder and director of the Ukrainian NGO for legal and military studies.
Yeah.
That's a whole lot of CV there.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yes, that's because, I can explain why like this, because we are in war. Mm-hmm. So everyone, I think, need to take some part in this. Someone like analyst, like in NGO, yes, we are doing some work like for protecting our soldiers, their rights, and also analytics of the warfare, of the current issues, also about cooperation with our partners, with weapons, armed, and so on. That's very important. And also what we did, that's Ukrainian reforms, in the military sphere.
I'm glad you brought up how important NGOs are, and not just the NGOs that are collecting donations, which are incredibly important as well, but more what we would know in the US as think tanks.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you have a lot more freedom than we do as enlisted soldiers and NCOs and officers to do outreach. And if I may, you were on an American radio station last week since we last spoke. And that was because you don't have the same restrictions we do. How did that go, speaking to an American radio host?
Yes, that was very interesting, That was an interview during 35-40 minutes. I didn't expect that it will be so much questions. Yes, but it was very interesting. I really appreciate for this opportunity. And we spoke about current issue in Ukraine, about battlefield, about our counteroffensive, about Wagner groups in Belarus, yes, about different mercenaries and terrorist groups which Russians use during this war, because, maybe someone in United States or somewhere, they will be wonder when I will tell that the Russians still use a lot of prisoners, in different mercenary groups in the structure of Ministry of Defense of Russia.
I would like to mention that. We know from human intelligence and from interceptions and such, just what you're saying. And the most widely discussed one at the moment is Storm Group Z. Which operates, as you were saying, directly in the chain of command of the Russian military. We're not even talking mercenaries. They are technically soldiers in the Russian army.
And
they're convicts.
Yeah, but they are from prisons. They are recruited from prisons, by Ministry of Defense. Can you imagine in normal countries that it could happen? I can't imagine this.
We laughed at Wagner for being war criminals and terrorists, for recruiting prisoners. And we're not just talking prisoners who might have committed a military crime of taking a Jeep on a test drive or something. We're talking rapists. We're talking murderers. We're talking the most violent offenders in Russian society are now fighting against Ukraine on behalf and as members of the Russian army. No, I can't imagine it, actually. We laugh about it for a few moments, but then when the seriousness comes in, you understand just how depraved and broken Russian society is.
And that's a huge problem, it seems to me. So we spoke about this, we spoke about Ukraine, we spoke about American support for us, for which we really appreciate. And that was a moment to which I was unprepared. That was like in the finish, in the last moment of our interview, to the finish of this moment, they asked me about which song I prefer to listen after my interview, and I didn't know. I just told that, look, you can choose. I allow you to choose what will be the song, because I didn't really imagine that it will be. But everything was perfect, yes, and I think that's very important to speak about this for American people, for foreign auditor, to speak about what's happening really in Ukraine. So this is, about the nature of this war, what I can see, because what I can see sometimes in the foreign medias, in European medias, in Americans, that they are writing like this, counteroffensive, and Ukraine will liberate territory, and so on, everything will go on. But that's very important, yes. We want to liberate territory. Mm-hmm. But the first point, what we want just to protect our people from this genocidal war. The nature of war that's against our people, against our identity, against our freedom.
You brought up a word.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, but it's such an important word. You brought up the word genocide. During the first months of the full-scale invasion, people were using the term genocide. However, it wasn't the legal term yet. No international body had accepted the fact of what Russia was doing was a genocide to Ukrainians. Now, there's actually legal standing among multiple bodies, international groups, who have labeled it a genocide, and different parliaments and different lower houses across the world. As a military and legal expert, is this a genocide?
Yes, exactly, absolutely. I want to say that, look, this nature, that I made research and I published a paper last year in English, in Ukrainian, in English, yes. Okay. That was about the nature and the evolution of Russian, previously Soviet, previously Russian Empire, and nowadays Putin genocide against Ukrainians. And what I did, I mentioned a lot of different cases, and I made examples of this, and also with the different, with the different parts of this paper, what I wrote, that's about examples of genocidal rhetoric on Russian TV, state information policy that calling for genocide, yes, in Ukraine, and also what we saw from the full-scale invasion, what we saw in Bucha and in different places. Mm-hmm. That was like killings of civilian people.
One reason people like Alexander and many Ukrainians were so quick to label it a genocide after full-scale invasion is because Ukrainians have lived through 2 genocides, now a third, in less than 100 years.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you had the Holodomor.
Yeah.
In 1932, 1933, where you were seeing Ukrainians literally starving to death on the streets. Then you had the Tatars, who were very much genocided in the latter stages of World War II.
Yeah.
Either through extermination or being filtrated out. And so ultimately, when you have one country on their 3rd genocidal act against the people of another country, you realize that sometimes it's not the legal term that you're waiting for. You just know it inherently in your soul, you know it in your heart, and then you know it through, as you said, some of the legal descriptions in this paper you wrote, the acts that took place against Ukrainians in Bucha, Irpin, the government policy, and one of the lesser discussed aspects of war crimes, but those who are engaging in the official propaganda narratives of the Kremlin. And you have people like Solovyov and Skabeva and the folks behind RT who happily push extremes when it comes to Russian policy. Talk to me about the media. I don't mean free speech. I mean these literal propagandists who it almost feels like Putin or whoever is Shoigu or Medvedev or whoever it might be is almost protected because whatever they do is not quite as extreme as what the propagandists call for them to do. Can you discuss that aspect of Russian society?
Yeah, you know that what propaganda did. When I spoke about Russian state policy, information policy, we need to understand that this is policy. That's not like, you know, like USA, in Ukraine, somewhere, or somewhere in Europe, when you can speak about some issue. No, that's a policy. And what the point, what's the main goal of this policy? It's like, you know, fury. That's also, you know, that's also everyone, everywhere. It's their fault that we are living so bad here, not our government, because that's because of Americans. That's because of NATO, near our borders. That's because of Ukrainians, you know, also.
Of course.
That's because of everyone. That's because of the people from Caucasus region. Because when we are speaking about genocide, the genocide was in Russian history, in the history of Russian Empire, not only against Ukrainian people, but also against people from the Caucasus Mountains region, Cherkess and different ethnic groups. So that's the main point. And if you want to live better, you need to go to army, and you need to go to the war against Ukraine or against someone. Why? Because then you will live in better. Then you will fix your problem, because problem not in our government, not in us, not in our society, not in our country. Problem outside. And that's like empire, you know, empire minds, neo-empire.
You brought up something that is very difficult for anyone outside. No one understands Russians better than Ukrainians do. No one. There's no one on the planet, because Ukrainians existed well before Russians. And ever since, for the last 1,300 years, more or less, the Russians have really been aggravating to you. And sometimes you were existing within the same framework politically. Other times you've been at war. And there's been very few years where you haven't been threatened with war by the Russians. You mentioned the military being given this higher place in society, even though we know how the troops are treated once they're sent to the front. If you look at the Telegram channels of the Russian Ministry of Defense, in English and in Russian, it's two different parts of information that's being put out there. In the English version, you have, okay, we are fighting in this zone, this happened. Lies from the Russian Ministry of Defense. Nonetheless, it sticks to pretty much the battlefield. When you go into the Russian MOD Russian language site, it's basically a recruiting pitch of people talking about how great it is if they're willing to go sacrifice themselves. And make no mistake, any Russian signing a contract to go to the front is sacrificing themselves to the Russian Empire. Not for the Russian Empire, but to the Russian Empire. How has that... Ukraine has been free of being part of the Russian government for more than 30 years now. Going on 33 years in August. If I'm correct, August will be independence.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, no, 32 years. I was thinking we were in 2024 already. Sorry. Why was Ukraine able to grow despite having such a strong military, despite being a somewhat traditional society, an agrarian society? How come Ukraine was able to grow in this liberal democratic way while Russia pushed towards a feudal mindset and an insular view of the world? How did that happen after 32 years apart?
Yeah, that's because we are different, you know, and that's also, look, Putin often speaking about that we are one, you know, one people, Russians and Ukrainians, that's the same. No, no, we are different people, we are different nations. We are
1,000%. Russia hates the truth, but this is a fact.
Yes.
Ukrainians and Russians are wholly different.
Different. Absolutely different. So, and that's why, you know, that we are always, I remember in our history, we fought for freedom through the centuries in different times. And we, you know, that, of course, sometimes it was because of our, I think, geographical location, you know, between different empires, Ottoman empires, Russian Empire, during the centuries and so on. So that was not so easy to fight for our freedom, but we did it. We tried this. And what I can see right now...
Sorry. Yeah. He says it so nonchalantly. It wasn't so easy to fight for our freedom.
Yeah.
It takes the soul of a warrior and the minds of people who are on the good side of history to understand that despite fighting for your freedom for so many generations, it's just something that you are asked to do for your country and for the world. And we're seeing that now.
Yeah, we see this. And do you remember that last time on our first podcast, I told about and spoke about, you know, Western support during this moment. That's very important because I think that that's the first time in history we have so strong support from our Western partners.
It's shocking how much support, and I'm biased because I'm here in the army, but to see the coalition of nations supporting Ukraine growing, in fact. A lot of nations that were in fact neutral or somewhat against Ukraine at the beginning are now offering help. Serbia comes to mind, even if they're still working with the Russians, they are offering aid. We see Turkey going from very neutral to very pro-Ukraine in their actions. So a lot has shifted. Please continue, but I wanted the world to understand that.
Yes, that's very important. That's what I'm talking about. So, and we are different nations, we are different people, and that's why, you know, Russian government, they are looking on this and how they are thinking that, look, if Ukrainians will be free, they will be living better. Yes, they will be in the European Union, they will be in NATO in the future. So what? That will be the threat for our power, for our government, for Kremlin, because that's the question of time when Russians will ask, but why they are living better? Yes. We have Putin, we have some another president. That doesn't really matter. But why Ukrainians living better? And that's the main issue. And of course, they will lost their power, and that's why they are thinking that Ukrainians need to be with Russians. And the second point.
So basically, to silence them. In order not to be able to spread freedom to their own population.
You need to be poor here near. Only Russians can be rich. They will be living, you know, in good conditions and so on. And
I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. If you saw some of the places that we liberated, and you know this, but I'm speaking to the audience, the way the Russian soldiers lived was simply the most disgusting way that a human being, I have to watch what I say, the way that a human being could exist and still claim to be civilized. It's horrific, and it truly is in many ways inhumane.
Yeah. That's correct. And the second point, you know, that once Raphael Lemkin, and Raphael Lemkin, he was a lawyer in the international law, and he is the author of genocide term in the international law. And he stated before UK government in 1949. And what he stated, what he said, that look, Russians provide genocide against Ukrainians. That's why, because they doesn't want that Ukrainians exist. Why? Because they want to have Sovietic people which they will use for aggression against Europe. They just need to have this, just to have these people without identity, without any questions. They will be like, I don't know, some in Utopia, in Orwell's book or somewhere, and they will be soldiers, and we will go with our empire interests to Europe, to the West. So that's why. And when we are talking about the threats to the West, that's not only because of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Because if you imagine that Russians did it and they occupied all Ukrainian territory, I believe that during few years, they just took our soldiers, our people, and moved with Russian soldiers against Poland, for example, to Poland, to Baltic states, to Europe.
Like we're seeing with the so-called DPR and LNR.
Yes.
We're seeing it with these illegally and temporarily annexed oblasts of Ukraine, where Ukrainians are now being forced to join the Russians in fighting against Ukrainians.
Yes.
It's sadistic.
Absolutely. Yes. So that's when we are talking about this example. So that's why we just called Western countries to be united with Ukraine, because that's the common threat. What we can see Russians are doing right now against southern ports of Ukraine, seaports, yes, against people in Odessa, in Chernomorsk, in different cities. They are trying to destroy our infrastructures of our seaport. And that's not the threat, and this attack not only against Ukraine, that attack on different countries, because we supplied from these seaports to different countries the grain.
I'm glad you brought up this topic for a variety of reasons, specifically because we were discussing genocide just a few minutes ago. What have we seen? We've seen an attack on the food.
Yeah.
We had 60,000 tons of grain destroyed just in one night of attacks.
Yeah.
More was destroyed prior, more has been destroyed since. Then you had civilians die from Russian terroristic actions. We have at least two who passed away in Mykolaiv last night. In Crimea, the death toll has been increasing every day. Every day there's new victims because the war criminals that are under Putin's command are carrying out attacks on civilians. Destruction of a food supply is genocide.
Yeah.
Legally. The killing of a group of people due to their nationality is genocide.
Yeah.
So you have a situation where, let's put the food aside for a second. Let's talk about the Ukrainian people. They're still living in Odessa because it's their home. They're Ukrainian.
Yeah.
They're still living in Mykolaiv. It's their home. They're Ukrainian. They're still living along that entire southern line, not quite on the sea, but, well, in Odessa it is on the sea. Mykolaiv is as well. But you have villages and towns and cities between Mykolaiv and Odessa where they're now under constant attack. What is giving the people in Odessa, in Mykolaiv, in the liberated areas of Kherson, in the liberated areas of Zaporizhia, the strength to put up with these constant attempts to literally exterminate them? Because that's the word we have to use. Russia, under Vladimir Putin, is attempting to exterminate the people of Ukraine. How are they finding the strength to put up with it and to fight back?
I think that's because of our willings, that we are people feeling like right now, of course they are afraid, I need to say, but they understand that this is the war, this is the battle for our lives, not only for our future. We need to, we want to live right now, because we have the threats every day, missile attacks and so on. They just want to live, and also for our future, for our freedom, and also for our values. We don't want people from Odessa. I remember last year when Russian forces were near Mykolaiv, and then if they captured Mykolaiv during last year, so they moved to Odessa, of course. And people were disturbed because of this. They were afraid that Russians will come, because they don't want to live with Russians and under Russian occupation. So that's why, and this, and Russians made mistake, huge mistake.
What's that? What was their number one mistake that they made?
They thought, and Putin thought, that Ukrainians will invite Russians. They will celebrate, like they call this, liberation and so on. From whom? I don't know. So
you have to find ways to smile during the war.
Yeah.
And Vladimir Putin and his criminal cabal managed to give us many opportunities to at least laugh at them, if not smile.
Yeah. So, and that was a huge mistake. And also, they thought, for example, last autumn, when they attacked, or winter, when they attacked a lot of our electricity power plants, infrastructure objects, and so on, they thought that our morale will be low, that we will live in, like, without electricity, blackout will be, and so on and so on. We will have a lot of problems. And so then our morale will be low, and everyone will go on the streets to our government and will say, look, you need to stop this war because we are living without electricity, without everything, and so on. That's very bad. Yes, of course. That was very bad. Yes, it was. But we didn't do like this. We continue fighting right now, and that's because we don't want to live under Russian occupations. Because we saw Bucha, we saw Irpin, we saw Saltivka in Kharkiv. Yes, the district. We saw everything. We can see what's happened right now in Donetsk Oblast, in Bakhmut. Russians stated that, look, we liberate Bakhmut. Every house destroyed. Every house in Bakhmut. Everything destroyed. That's the liberation.
Explain to me how countries are still willing to work with Russia when they see what they're doing around the globe and yet claim to be liberators, specifically in the global south, in countries like Africa, so countries throughout Africa, not like Africa, but countries such as South Africa, who were apparently threatened with war the other day by Vladimir Putin. Talk to us about that imperialistic, feudalistic, colonialistic mindset.
Yeah. That's, I wonder because of this, because look, I saw that people in Africa, they fought for their freedom also, and right now for different values, the values of freedom, that values of anti-colonialistical movements and so on. And nowadays their leaders came to Putin to St. Petersburg, and and the president of Algeria told, look, you are the best leader in the world right now. Putin, Mr. Putin, you are the best leader in the world. Oh my God, it's just, and what's happening because of this? I think that that's because of money, and that's because of this interest, which, and they forget about these values. They are thinking about money, about interests, about some common economical interests. They, they have Wagner groups in different African states, yes, and they are trying to have more money, more profits, and that's the problem. And that's because of this, what I think. And Putin trying to find the friendship with autocrats like him, because they understand each other, and then Russians try to help these autocrats in, like Assad, for example,
or to keep his,
to keep his in like a president. Yes, his power. So, and there really doesn't matter what Assad did with Syrian people, yes, and what I don't know other leaders did, and what Maduro did in Venezuela against people there. They just keep them to be in power and just help them to stay in power, because that's very comfortable for them, and that's very comfortable for Putin, because then he can say, just look, Russia doesn't isolate, because we have friends around the world, you know, Syria, Nicaragua, Venezuela, I don't know, North Korea, yes, Iran. Wonderful club of stay, yes, wonderful club. And then they're talking that, look, we are democracy states. Look, everything fine. We had elections and so on and so on. Especially Iran, democracy state, yes. Especially Russians, yes. No, and North Korea. Club of democracy, Korea, yes.
They discuss freedom. If they weren't such horrific leaders, and if their power structures weren't such evil groups, it would almost be funny. Because as you just said, none of those countries you mentioned have any sort of democracy or freedom, and yet they use these words, going back to what you suggested with Orwell. It's very Orwellian with Newspeak and some of this issue here. We have, unfortunately, some insight into the minds of the Russians. There's not much there, and it's pretty disgusting, but we were able to get a sense of, especially a sense of who they are, the part where you mentioned that the ruling dictator didn't want his own people to understand how good Ukrainians had made life, for risk of infecting them with an idea that they could have it better. Speaking of having it better, we talked about terrorism. We talked about the big pictures. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the front lines for a bit. When you were talking about rockets coming down in different places, today, as many days, the Land Force headquarters stated, be careful because there's a heightened state of attack from rocket strike. We'll use rockets and missiles interchangeably. I know there are different systems. However, whether it's a rocket, whether it's a missile, whether it is an artillery shell, whether it's a mortar, or even something dropping from the sky from a drone, we understand that the Russians are making our lives hell, but we're still advancing. Give us some sense of what's going on there.
Yeah, we are continuing our advance, our counteroffensive, and what I can see, what I've noticed during these days, several days, that we have some progress on the Eastern Front, near Bakhmut. That's very important. Small city Orikhovo-Vasilievka. And also what we have that General Syrsky stated that we have a chance to liberate Bakhmut and moving forward. But of course we need some more resources, because Russians using 7-8 artillery shells, and we are still using 1 against the 7-8. So when we will have, I think, more supplying of shells, we will have ammunition, when we will have more weapons, we can do this, and we can go and we can move forward. However, we are doing even when Russians have 7 against our 1. We are continuing doing this, and we are continuing this counteroffensive. And
I'm
also,
glad you brought this up. Yeah. Numbers don't always matter, and I explained that to people when they confused the 100,000 Russian troops amassed along the directions of Kupiansk and Liman for being Kharkiv city. Newspaper outlets were running pictures of Kharkiv city, 100,000 troops. Not only is there nowhere close to that, but as I tell my listeners quite often, and my viewers, is that in Ukraine, it's about efficiency and effectiveness. It's not about the total number of troops. I would take 25,000 Ukrainian troops against an army of 100,000 Russians any day. I'm from Las Vegas. I understand what a gamble is. And that's not a gamble. Our 25,000 would rout 100,000 of the Russian troops that are out there. It's simply because when it comes to this war, it's less the numbers than who the commanders are, and more importantly, that the soldiers understand what they're fighting for.
Yeah, that's very important, yes, because of moral, we understand that we are on our land, in our country, we are fighting for our freedom, for our people, first of all. And that's inspired, really. And of course, it's support inspired. And you mentioned Kupiansk. I want to say that we have a first experience of and example of using cluster munition. There.
It came out yesterday.
Yes, yes, it was. And so we expect that it will help to us to, using against Russian troops. Because near Kupiansk we continue a defensive operation, we are defense there. Yes, everything is okay. Of course, Russians, they are pressure, they continue. But
you get a lot of the same information I do.
Yeah, that's the same.
We'll talk about this. I just wanted to say, you said some battles along the front lines of Kupiansk, Avdiivka, Marinka, and the Mon directions.
No, I will not speak like this.
We had 32 separate battles yesterday, and we held the lines each time.
Yes, that's like some official, but what I want to say is that, look, I'm always talking just when someone asking me about Kupiansk, yes, about is it dangerous that Russians could move forward and they will break up our defensive line? Yes, of course, and that's why we continue fighting. That's why we continue defensive there. And that what I'm thinking about, I'm thinking that if we will have a little bit more support, for example, I'm almost confident, and we will use them in the Eastern Front line right now. I'm almost confident that we can advance near Bakhmut, and we can move to Russian reserves from Kupiansk to Bakhmut to elsewhere, and from southern also. And that will be helpful for our forces on the southern front line. Near different cities, I can tell about them. For example, I don't know, Robotine, Staromayorsk, and so on. I'm not sure that people will know about this. I just can say that what we can see right now, that we are continue our counteroffensive operation, but Russians, they still have a lot of reserves.
I had to smile there for a moment, not because war is funny, but he almost sounded official when you said that Russians are continuing their counter-offensive operations.
Yes. Yeah, Ukrainians, but why?
But we were talking because the Russians are trying to get back some of their old positions.
Yeah, that's true. That's correct. Yeah. Yes, that's true. That's correct. And that's why our counteroffensive probably is slower than someone expected.
Mm-hmm. Does that matter, though? As long as Ukrainian lives are not being lost, and as long as we're making steady progress against the invaders, while people want it to be like a movie, and they want it to have one big battle, and then it be over.
Yeah.
Seriously, does it matter how long it takes as long as casualties are being kept down? Isn't saving Ukrainian lives and Russian lives more important than trying to end the war quickly, where there might still be residual, fighting, or an Israeli situation where we're being attacked all the time? We take it step by step. We achieve the 1991 borders. We implement President Zelensky's peace formula. And then Russia no longer attacks us. Versus speeding through, having a situation such as in Kherson or in Kharkiv, and then months later, having to still deal with them, even though the counteroffensive was looked at as being successful.
But that I remember, you mentioned about Kherson, I remember, and I even have this post on my Facebook. I wrote it on June probably last year, yes. Mm-hmm. And I wrote that counteroffensive operation on the right bank of Dnipro River has begun for liberation of Kherson. And yes, it was June or July, last year, yes, almost 1 year ago. And when Kherson was liberated on October. And yes, but why I wrote about this? Because when I saw that Ukraine had HIMARS and we are using them, and then we began our offensive operation, our advance, but we did it. We had a success. Yes, of course, it took 3-4 months, but we had a success. So even not only in Kherson, but near Kharkiv.
I'm glad you brought that up. Everyone talks of the September counteroffensive,
Yeah.
but we lived through the late April, early May counteroffensive to push them from the Ring Road to a little bit closer to the border, and only then in September did we push them out of 85% of Kharkiv Oblast. That's the other thing that I think the general public needs to understand, is that this massing of troops is on illegally and temporarily occupied Ukrainian territory that the Russians have never been driven off of. We were only able to deoccupy about 85% of Kharkiv Oblast. I don't know the specific number in Kherson Oblast, but it's somewhere, it's very much divided by the waterway as to what we've deoccupied there. So the Russians managed to hold on even after we score the public relations victories. It's about scoring the complete victory. And last night, when discussing some issues of domestic policy, President Zelensky was very clear. Everything comes secondary to military victory. That was a long way of me asking, is there any chance the Russian line collapses, or are we going to see this continuous 100 meters, 300 meters, 500 meter a day push through the lines?
I think that we will continue pressure on Russian positions, and of course and then we will see the situation that they will have a low moral, it seems to me, and they will be collapse. But they can be collapse only in the case when we have this pressure, only when we are moving forward. Because only if we will stop, for example, we will stop. Let's imagine, we stopped. We do not have more power, we do not have more weapons, for example. And what then? Russians will be happy, because they will say, okay, that's great, let's speak about negotiations right now. And let's freeze this conflict, let's freeze on the front line. And yes, that's great.
Speaking of frozen conflicts, absolutely this is what Russia wants, especially when they toss out into the wind their fake peace plans. They're preparing, from my understanding, for new elections, fraudulent elections, elections with no standing, but what they call elections in the temporarily occupied and illegally occupied areas of Kherson, of Zaporizhia, of Luhansk, and Donetsk. First off, I want to point out that in nowhere does it mention Kharkiv, because they understand that they will never take Kharkiv, and they will be expelled from every other region that they're in currently. However, is this attempt to legitimize their standing? Is this a longer-term view towards saying, hey, this land is ours? Or is it more towards intimidating the civilians there and trying to basically get docile slaves to have to answer to whatever the Russians do? Because now what we're hearing, and it's been confirmed by certain government officials, is if you don't take a Russian passport, you may be filtrated out, you may be denied medical treatment, you may have your pension stopped. Tell us about why the Russians, from a psychological standpoint, as much as we can't understand them, why are they taking such a barbaric approach to people that they are allegedly thinking will join Ruski Mir?
Oh, yes, that's. I think that they are trying to change, Russians, first of all, using a lot of propagandas, and they are trying to change the minds of people. They're trying to, especially older people, you know, that remember some Soviet times, they're trying to use, you know, like these memories. And what Russians do on the occupied territory, they provide some political and economic course, like, you know, like communists, like during communist time. You will have higher pensions than you used to be with Ukrainian government. You will have some, I don't know, free services and so on and so on. And only on occupied territory, not in Russia. They do not have like this. And why? Because you need to think that, oh, yes, probably they will be better. Yes. And then what we can see on the occupied territory in the eastern, you know, self-called DPR and LPR. They are living in the poor. They are living. The Russians moved from their infrastructure objects, factories, and so on and so on. The people moved from there. Yes, only older people stayed there, and everything collapsed. Social system collapsed. Economic collapsed. Everything collapsed.
I remember being in Kherson Oblast, actually the city of Kherson, shortly after the deoccupation. I'm smiling because of what you just described. And there was this billboard up belonging to the invaders, and it was still in perfect condition. I was very surprised that nobody had torn it down yet. And it was a woman, maybe in her 30s, maybe in her 40s. It was irrelevant because the picture wasn't about her. It was about her mother. Her beautiful babushka, you know, the babushka to her children, this beautiful retiree. And the billboard was clear. With us, you get free medicine.
Oh, yeah.
Very simple, very to the point. And it showed this idea that you will be taken care of and you'll be held.
Yeah.
The Ukrainian people, one thing that I think the world understands at this point, will never sell out their freedom, their free will, their freedom of choice, of expression, of speech for some medicine or a higher pension. How long can the Ukrainian people hold out?
You know that I remember this from history, by the way, that Bolsheviks and communists, when they came here, they also told that, look, you will have everything free, everything will be okay. And what they did, they stole everything from people, and, you know, from farmers, cows, horses, and so on. And it was repressions and so on against people.
I want to add, currently, they're not just destroying grain. In the port city of Skadovsk, in temporarily and illegally occupied Kherson Oblast, they're literally stealing the farmer's grain and shipping it to Russia, which I just, since you were talking about it in the past, I wanted to show again, the Russians don't change when it comes to the last 100 years, last 500 years.
And you know what I can see right now, a lot of people, they are writing me some messages from occupied territory. Even
don't worry, you don't have to say it like I do.
Occupied, okay. Unoccupied, that's okay. Even from Crimea, they are writing that they are waiting, Ukrainian army, they are waiting the liberation. Of course, you know what our point and what our main goal, to liberate these people such faster as we can. Because of course we understand that Russians try to do everything. They are coming to schools, to the people, to the, you know, and they are speaking about to the children. They are speaking in the way of propaganda that yes, Ukraine is very bad, West very bad, United States that's very bad, that's the main enemies, and so on and so on and so on. That's propaganda, and we understand that's dangerous, because some people, when they are living in the situation, when they are hearing every day from everywhere, everywhere, from everywhere, from TV, radio, internet from somewhere in schools, you know, in the universities, they are becoming like, oh my God, so it could be like crazy. So we understand that we are fighting, first of all, not even for the territory, but what I am talking about always for these people, because you understand when someone writing to you that, look, we are waiting for Ukrainian army, we are living more than 500 days under occupation, under Russian occupation, but we are still waiting Ukrainians. And that's inspiring.
Because they know we're coming.
Yeah.
And we know we have to go because they're waiting for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is inspiring.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy. It's something that will never be repeated, because after our victory, I think the whole entire world is going to see that the armed forces of Ukraine, supported and backed by the people of Ukraine, were able to achieve a great victory, one that other people from other countries around the world can stand up to their tyrants and dictators that came from it. It is inspirational. That's the only word.
Yeah.
It's the
correct.
Only word.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the main point. That's why we fight. That's, you know, I just want to say that this war, that's more than just the war against Russians, against Russian army, and for our, you know, identity and so on. That's because of values. Mm-hmm. Which values you are choose? Values of autocracy, dictators, yes, values of slavers, I'm sorry, or you want to live like a free person, like in the values of freedom, democracy, rule of law. And we understand right now that, you know, when you can see what's happening under occupation and what's happening in other parts of Ukraine, you can compare this, because this is different types of lives. So that's more than just war for territories or against Russian imperialism. That's for values, and for values which taken for the free world and Russians, Iran, North Korea, and so on.
You brought up values. There's something I oftentimes say to people. What are you fighting for? And I answer, liberty and liberation.
Yeah.
Because we need to liberate all of the country before we can have liberation for all of the people. But I tell them, you know what we're not fighting for? We're not fighting for tolerance, and we're not fighting for acceptance. Because in Ukraine, the feeling is that every single human being deserves to have that fire of freedom burning inside of them. And words such as, we're going to tolerate you, or we're going to accept you, truly hold people back from that notion and sense of individual freedom, which is the reason we're fighting for and on behalf of all those Ukrainians who are still in the temporarily and illegally occupied locations. What I want the world to take from this, we were discussing growing coalition partners and the West supporting Ukraine and some of the other countries as well coming along now. I want the world to take this as a beacon of light for freedom, and that will be Ukraine's #1 export. We received good news. Multiple companies are starting to be interested in renovating the airport.
Yeah.
They're looking towards bigger contracts for larger productions. But ultimately, in the end, until we get each and every one of those people back under the blue and yellow flag of Ukraine, then our job isn't finished.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely agree with this. That's a very important point.
Final question.
Yeah.
You have Ukrainian Air Force on your shirt.
Yeah.
You mentioned it being a gift. Not a trick question at all. It's actually going to, even though I'm smiling about it, explain to me how every day Ukrainian pilots are still flying successful missions against the enemy, despite having much fewer planes, despite having significantly less fuel available. And there are also being questions about some of the missiles that they're able to carry with them. Yet, and this is not propaganda, this is why I'm so excited to ask you this question, every single day. Sometimes it's 6 sorties, sometimes it's 10 sorties, but we are flying successfully against the Russian jets, and we are carrying out incremental victories thanks to our supply of warfighting planes.
Yeah, that's really, I'm proud because of this gift, because it's 7 tactical aviation brigade, which include Su-24 bombers, and they are using right now. They began, of course, this war from a full-scale invasion. Even previously, yes, but we didn't use aviation previously, yes. We are using actively right now from the full-scale invasion, yes. And they did a huge job because what they did, a lot of strikes on Russian forces, and nowadays they're using Storm Shadows. Mm-hmm. And that's so very important, long-range missiles.
The Storm Shadows and what's the French version?
Scalp.
The Scalp. Both have to be fired from these fighter jets.
Yes, from these fighter jets. So I'm really proud because of Ukrainian pilots, because they're doing a great job. And I really appreciate it.
You're smiling right now. You are glowing.
Yes, I'm inspired. It's this all Soviet planes and Russians, they have more planes and they have more air defense systems. But
I'm glad, by the way, I want to throw this out there. I'm glad that our commanders and our civilian leaders are finally allowing the world to understand that we're fighting a battle against a numerically better equipped military. They have more of everything than we do.
Yeah.
And yet we're still winning. And so ultimately the Air Force pilots, who are heroes every day, go out there and probably make more with less than any other Air Force pilot since maybe World War I, in the sense that we have a finite amount of jets. Forget even the discussion of the F-16s. We have a finite amount of former Soviet jets and newer ones that were flown in Warsaw Pact countries. And so ultimately, I understand why you're smiling, and I'm glad the world is finally hearing the truth that we are battling against a superior opponent and beating them.
Yeah. And what I can say is that if we will have more planes, F-16, I'm confident that victory will be faster for us. I'm confident because, I can see, when I can see our pilots and what are they talking about, that they are ready. They are ready to continue fighting, but what they are talking about, just give us the planes, give us its military jets, and everything will be fine. And we will do this. And, and that's inspired very much because we can see.
If they say they can get it done, you know that they're going to get it done.
Yeah, exactly. So we're waiting F-16s very much.
We heard from Defense Minister Reznikov that it could be into early next year.
Yeah.
However, we heard from the White House yesterday that the F-16s may be here before the end of the year. We have the Depicums. I have a sense that we'll be receiving ATACMS soon.
Yeah.
This is not OPSEC, it's just maybe wishful thinking, but we'll have them soon. Once we have these weapons in place, no doubt it will reinvigorate anybody who's getting tired as we go out of the summer and into the fall. Will we have victory by the end of the year? When I say victory, I mean Russia, maybe not, and I'm going to be a realist, maybe not 100% deoccupation, but Russia trying to surrender on our terms.
Yeah, I think, yes, we can be. What I can say is that if we will have all of this, of course, ATACMS and F-16s, it will be better. Not be better like ATACMS, but it will helpful. And I think that we can move to the Crimea borderline, and we can be near Crimea borderline. and then we just can use some of this kind of weapons against Russians on the occupied Crimea, and yes, with this pressure. And what I can say, we can call this like victory for this year, not in war, but in the huge battle.
I like that way.
Yeah,
yes.
in the huge battle. I'm talking realistic. Of course, I can say just, yeah, we can liberate even Crimea to the end of this year, but yes, of course, it would be great if we can do this. But I think that success will mean that we are near borderline of line of with the Crimea, and also we have a progress in the east, some progress. So it will be success.
You've brought up a great point. And as I said, I wasn't trying to box you in, because this is we're ending on an optimistic note. Talking about our fighter pilots, talking about how it's very unlikely that the morale of the Ukrainian people will break anytime soon. We woke up, you and I, on January 1st, 2023, to blackouts continuing everywhere. So the audience knows this. I was in the East on January 1st, 2023, and I would tell people in Kyiv, at least I have a generator and I have a Starlink. Because that's how bad the suffering was, that we would rather have been on the front and near the front than in the cities with the terrorism that the Russians tried. So you are correct. If we were to take January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023, and you take in the fact that we didn't break during the winter of Russian terrorism, we didn't break as they escalated the grain crisis, we didn't break as they threatened nuclear catastrophe, and little by little we were taking back land, and more we were getting the support from the allied nations, the partner, I'll call them partner nations. If we get to that point by December 31st, President Zelensky was clear this week on 2 points regarding Crimea. Crimea is non-negotiable in the sense that Crimea is Ukraine under international law in the eyes of our supporting nations and in the hearts of the Ukrainian people. But, and this is the one time I'm saying but today, there's been this open-ended question. Do we receive Crimea back through military means? Or do we receive Crimea back through diplomatic means? What I find so intriguing, and we're preparing next month for the 3rd annual Crimean Platform Summit, is that the government is open to either way of doing it. So when you were, I guess maybe I'm in awe of your skills as an analyst and understanding of military and political will here as well. That's the way to put it. As long as we get Crimea back, we're giving, this is how humane the people of Ukraine are. We're giving the Russians a choice. We will either go into Crimea and destroy more of your forces and take it back, or we're going to get, as you said, maybe to the steppes of Crimea. Maybe we have Sevastopol back and we're waiting to take the rest of the oblast back. However it works out, they have 2 choices. But both of those choices end with the fact that Crimea is Ukraine.
Yeah, that's the main point, yes. What we need to do, we want to liberate, and also what we, and Crimea, of course, and I want to say that I'm always talking that the first step and the first decision, what we need to provide after the liberation of Crimea, that's invitation, that change our constitution, and invitation for United States, for American Navy, for British Navy, for United Kingdom, King's Navy, for France, from Navy from France, to move and have Navy base in Crimea. And that will be, and that's mean that the space of security and defense in the Black Sea will be guaranteed.
This has been an amazing conversation again, Alexander.
Yeah.
We started by discussing Russian genocide.
Yeah.
We ended it by discussing post-victory Ukraine,
Yeah.
inviting some of the great naval powers of the world to share our resources in territorial waters.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think there's a better way to end it. We talked about a lot. I'm certain of one thing. Next week, we're going to have more to talk about because the war never stops.
Yeah.
And what takes place during the war shapes the pathway to victory. Thank you again for being here on Ukraine Inside.
Thank you.
And this is Sergeant Sarah Ashton Cirillo of the Armed Forces of Ukraine's Territorial Defense Forces Media Studios, joined by my guest host, Olександр Мусієнко, in discussing what the war looks like, and more importantly, what victory looks like.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining Ukraine Inside, and make sure to share this podcast with all of your friends and all those who are interested in Ukraine's war for liberty and liberation. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава.
And may God bless our troops and our sailors and our pilots.
Yeah.